Hi, I'm Chelsea Ohlemiller, and this is the Caretaker Journeys podcast.
Welcome to our meaningful conversation this week. I'm your host, Carole Leatham, and my guest today is Chelsea Ohlemiller, a wife, a mother, an educator who has Indiana roots and a passionate spirit. And guys, I cannot wait for you to meet her. Chelsea is a sappy romantic, a coffee junkie, a book collector, and a person who wears her heart on her sleeves. I think we could be best friends, except for I'm quite a bit older than you, so I don't know. Maybe I could be the older sister. I don't know. But I read your bio and I just resonated so much because who you are is so much like me, especially here we come. She's sarcastic. She's full of jokes, full of tears, and enjoys writing most when life gets messy or complicated. In 2017, Chelsea's mom passed away, and through her grief journey, she decided to take her mother's advice and share her writing with the world. One day, she gained the courage to honor her mother's wishes and write, and it turned out to be the best decision she ever made. And I'm telling you, listeners, it's a good one for us as well. Chelsea's book has been a timely and welcome read in my own life as I navigate the anticipated loss of my own mom. I cannot wait for you to meet her and hear her heart. Chelsea, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to share this conversation with you today. And I first just want to say, I hope you know that the work you're doing in your life with your family is so important and how inspiring it is. I know it's hard work and we sometimes don't understand how appreciated we are. So what you're doing is so powerful.
You're going to make me cry right off the bat here, girl, but that's okay. Chelsea, from the minute I picked up your book, I could feel the love for your mom. And a really important thing sort of has happened in my own life in the last 2 years. The love for my mom has overshadowed the pain and some of the things that happened, even as a child. And I could feel the love for your mom through the pages of your book. So will you share with us right off the bat your relationship with your mom and tell us just a little bit about her?
Yeah. So I was very blessed. I had a wonderful relationship with my mom. Her name was Rita.
Hmm.
And she was just that constant in my life. I always say that her faith was unwavering, not just for God and, heaven, but also just for everybody that she loved. She always had that faith for us. And so she was just one of those women that made the world a little bit brighter by helping others without having any kind of recognition. But she also had those little quirks, that made her funny and just, she loved reading, baking. She absolutely was a brilliant baker. And so there were just a million things about her that made her great, as all, most mothers are. And so, yeah, she was a great friend and a great encourager.
Mm.
And like you said, I lost her in 2017 and I just miss her fiercely.
Mm. Yeah, as I shared with you before, and my listeners know, I'm going through this anticipation of losing my mom. And the last 2 years being her caregiver and watching her, she has a disease that creates hypoxia in her brain. And so she's got almost like a short-term dementia. She could tell you everything that happened from her childhood, from her teenage years, even from her early adult years. But to tell her that she needs to get up and do this today, she's not going to remember. And what's so fascinating is at the end of your first chapter, you write, never forget her and everything she was, because the day she dies, you become her legacy. This was especially meaningful for me because I have seen how my family is now seeing my mom through a new light because of the care, knowing her history, knowing some of the things that she's said and done in the past, her history. It's almost like I can see my sister, my brothers, and I already becoming her legacy. So, will you share with us how you have become your mom's legacy?
Yeah. The first thing for me was when I was writing that, I needed hope. I needed to
Mhm.
step beyond just the loss of her and really understand how to carry forward that relationship and that connection. And so for me, I realized that's what legacies are. It's keeping
Ah.
memories alive while also creating one of your own. And so I realized in that moment, wow, I am two things now. I am my mother's legacy and I am my own. And I
Mhm.
need to merge them with a passion and an intentionality that is helpful for my family and also just the world. I want
Yeah.
to be those things that I loved about her. And I do realize in that same reality, I am lucky that I had a legacy worth replicating. But I understand that there are women that have legacies of their moms that need to be recreated, and that's okay, whichever one that you are. And so for me, just realizing, a lot of times the legacy can seem like an immense responsibility. So we step away from it. And I think when I realized, oh, wow, just living, just breathing and going into the next day is part of this legacy. And it doesn't have to be this, you don't have to write a book. I wrote a book, but you don't have to, you don't have to make a podcast. It can just be showing up boldly for the people that you love.
Yeah.
And I just really have clung to that legacy component because that's what gives me hope. And it's also what makes me feel still connected to my mom.
I love your story. And I had a very complicated relationship with my mom. She became a single mom of 4 children when I was 12 years old. And I had an abusive alcoholic father who abandoned us when I was 9. And, it's like it created all of this different dynamic than what I think a family could be. When I look back on my family with my husband and my children raising them, it was so different.
Right.
And I struggled for years to try to recreate that motherly relationship that I saw my friends
Yep.
have. And I realized one day it wasn't going to happen. And there was a grief, and I backed away. I literally backed away from my entire family because I couldn't handle the pain of
Uh,
what this is. And of course, my mom, as she got older and sicker, she got more difficult to deal with.
right.
And so it was easy for me to just walk away. And then 2 years ago, I had to step up, or let's change the narrative there. I chose to step up. I
Right.
chose to walk back into that legacy. I chose to walk back into that relationship when my mom was diagnosed with 2, not 1, but 2 terminal diseases. And they fight against each other, and it makes her daily living very, very difficult. But what I've discovered is that it has a rewarding part of it as well. And when I got to page 42 of your book, I took out my sticky notes, which my listeners know I'm a Post-it note girl. I took out my
Me too.
Post-it notes.
See?
I'm like, yeah, they're all over my window here. I took out my Post-it notes. I took out my highlighter, and those 2 pages, 42 and 43, have so many incredible nuggets for me because the chapter's called When It's Complicated. And you start writing, because my relationship with my mom was complicated and complex, people think it doesn't hurt as bad to lose her. I feel those words so deeply because it's not true. It is not true. There are so many parts of losing her that I struggle with. So my question to you, and I'm struggling to turn my page here. My question to you is, how has your complicated relationship with your mom impacted how you've grieved after
Yeah.
losing her?
I'm so glad that you bring up these sections of my book. So, in each chapter, the very last essay is titled When It's Complicated for exact people like this. And so
Mm,
these essays are actually written, they're all written by me, but it's written through people and women that I've talked to. So because like I said, I had a great relationship with my mother, but in my friends, in my family, in my church community, I realized, not everybody does. And so
mhm.
I wanted those stories to be honored too.
Yeah.
And one thing that I was hearing a lot is, the grief from losing my mom. I lose her every day a little bit and things that she doesn't get to be here before,
Mhm.
but I don't have a grief for what I didn't get to have when she was here because I had it. But
Yep.
all of these women, yourself included, you're grieving what you never had back then. You're
Mhm.
grieving what you're not going to have. And so your grief is, there's no grief that we weigh, but it has these complexities that makes it so intricate. And so what these women were telling me is that over and over again, people would say, you weren't even close with your mom. How can you be sad? You didn't
Yeah.
see her that much. How can you be sad?
Mhm.
Sometimes you didn't even like her. How can you be sad? And it's such a disservice because
Mhm.
every grief should be honored. Every grief should be recognized. And, we shouldn't be thinking, of why we shouldn't be missing these people, because we're
Yeah.
missing them for so many
Yeah.
reasons, you
Yeah.
know? And
Mhm.
it's just, I think our world is getting better about talking about grief,
Mhm.
which is why people are coming forward and saying, I do miss my mom, even though she wasn't around, or even though she had problems, or, whatever those complexities were. And so, what I wanted people to hear the most is that your grief is your grief, and it is powerful, and it changes your life, no matter if you were super close with your mom, no
Mhm.
matter if you had your mom for 10 years or 100 years.
Mhm.
And we have to recognize that all loss is loss.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. And it's so true. And I've had a few close friends look at me and go, "This is really hard for you. And I know your story. I know the deep dark secrets that not a lot of people know about how you were raised and the things that went on in your house. And I don't understand how you can be so sad, or I don't understand how you can step up
Mm.
in the way I have made. I think the last count was like 12 trips back and forth from California to Milwaukee in the last 2 years, 2.5 years. And that's a lot of money. It's a lot of time. And I have spent twice, I've been there for a month at a time. So the month of
Wow.
April last year, the month of July. And I have come to the understanding that I am so, so thankful for the last 2 years, because I've learned so much about my mom as I've watched her navigate the loss of her independence
Mm.
and how she's come to terms with the loss of her life when we had to put her on hospice, when she chose to go on hospice last summer. I've had the opportunity to realize that while I'm never, like you just said, I'm never going to go back and get that mother I wanted.
Right.
I'm not going to get the apologies for the painful things she said and did. But I had a mom who gave me this great strength of character.
Mm.
And really, she gave me, and I think the word moxie is the word that comes to my mind, to really do and have the authentic and transparent conversations that I'm having.
Right.
Because my mom was always a fighter, not for her kids, but for the underdog.
Right.
If she perceived someone was an underdog, she would go above and beyond. In fact, one time she kidnapped my aunt from a nursing home and
Oh,
took her across 5 state lines, and there were police and arrest warrant. I mean, it was kind of a crazy thing, and everybody was angry but then I sat back and I looked and I go, "Why did she do that?" Because she thought my aunt was being not taken
right.
care of. So I am thankful because I'm getting to reconcile. But what would you say to someone who never got to reconcile with their mom? Because I know some women who haven't.
Yeah. I think that the biggest thing in these moments is to realize and sit with the things that you cannot change,
Mm.
and that's a hard reality because, we ask God for answers and we don't get them. We ask our parents for answers and we don't get them. And it's hard to sit in the unknown.
Yeah.
It's hard to sit in the unchanged and the inability to be changed. And
Mhm.
I think that there is a sacred space when you can learn that, this is the way that it is and will be, but how can I sit with this and
Yeah.
comprehend this? And then also, I found that, sometimes it takes, and not everything, not abusive relationships and things that are very destructive, but sometimes to provide grace to the people that have hurt us the most. And I haven't had to do this with my mom, but I've had to do this with other people in my life.
Mhm.
And just realizing that while it still hurt us, while we weren't able to reclaim that relationship and that, connectivity, maybe it wasn't what I always thought. Maybe my perspective is only just one side and I could
Mhm.
mesh them a little more together to get both, an understanding and maybe a deeper gratitude for why things were the way they were.
Oh.
But it is hard, it's hard to sit in the what ifs
Mm.
or the I wish I would have had this, and I think it's just a really big space of learned, comprehension of what's okay for you and how to heal and move
Mhm.
on, because
Yeah.
you don't want to stay stuck in that
Yeah.
space. You want to find a way to grow around it, to continue forward.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you have to forget or, release it all, but at least just for your own life, take
Mhm.
off the weight that you can so you can walk a little bit lighter.
Mm. So, so good, Chelsea. I have spent the last 2 years going back over the relationship, starting from childhood, and just kind of looking and sitting, like you're talking about, sitting with those memories and really trying to understand, my early childhood. Why was it so hard? Well, my mom became a single parent when I was 9 of 4 children, the youngest being 2.
Wow.
You know, and oh no, I think he was only 1 at the time. So here you have this woman, and my dad just disappeared. So there was no financial support. We were on welfare. We were getting all of the Thanksgiving baskets from church and the schools. And I started looking at each sort of season of life and looking at where my mom was, not me, but
Right.
examining it from her perspective. So here is, I'm a child. I'm the oldest of 4. She's got 4 kids. She's got to work full time. She's got to do daycare. She got to do all this stuff by herself, plus financially provide for us. And I realized how hard that was for her. Then
Yep.
I realized when she got into the 70s and it became this free go out, party, and she had 2 other girlfriends that were able to go and do it. She wanted to do it. So
Right.
she was going and doing it and relying on me, and and while it maybe she didn't make the best decisions, she always made sure somehow there was someone to watch us or I was there. And then as I got to be an adult, or into my later teenage years, I realized that she was jealous
Yeah.
of my, now I'm, and so when I stepped back and started to see things from, let's just call it her perspective. Now I don't know, we're not going to have a conversation, but
Right.
I'm 99% sure that this is what happened. I realized that I could just move beyond
Mm.
and not, I think there's always going to be a part of me that grieves
Yep.
for that loss. I don't think we should ever forget that, but it makes me more intentional now
Yep.
with the relationships. And so I love that we can be more intentional. So I have thought a lot about stepping into my mom's legacy and what that looks like. So will you share with us what you mean when you say we step into our mom's legacy?
Yeah. So for me, that is, like I said, how we have 2 legacies. And so for me, stepping into my mom's legacy was really knowing that she started it. She created
Mhm.
it from all the women and men and people in her life that impacted her positively. And so I wanted to carry all of that.
Yeah.
I have my own path, but also I want to take all of that, construction and stuff from her road and put it in with mine. And
Mhm.
so it's really just a merging of her life and the impact she wanted to have forever so that she's
Mm.
not forgotten. And also doing that with my own purpose and my own wishes and hopes and craft and creativity. And so, and we all get that ability.
Mhm.
And that's the beauty, is that we get to have it look however we want.
Mhm.
And some of us are, duplicating that and just copy and pasting,
Yeah.
and then some of us are completely reinventing how that's going to look. But
Mhm.
either way, it's so beautiful as
Mhm.
long as you're taking everything you have learned, all
Mhm.
of the hardships, all the joy, all of it, all the messiness,
Mhm.
and using it to make something beautiful,
Yeah.
because as unfortunate as it is, grief has taught me a lot. I didn't want
Mhm.
the lessons. I wish
Yeah.
I would have had them much later in life. My mom was only
Yeah.
57 when she passed, so I'm navigating motherhood without her. I'm navigating
Mm.
all of these things.
Yeah.
But then on my days, there are days where I am so angry that she's missing, and,
Yeah.
so fearful of, different things. But then I remember, okay, she's still with me, just in a much
Mhm.
different way.
Yeah.
And if I'm truly carrying somebody's legacy, that means she's still here in influence and memory and in love. And
Yeah.
so that is literally what carries me on my
Mm.
hard days.
I I love that so much because it's true. We and I think another, like, to add a thought onto that, we choose how we're going to step into that legacy. Because in order to step into my mom's legacy, I have to let go of my disappointment. I have to let go of my anger. I have to let go of the what's never going to be. And part of the grieving process I've discovered that I'm going through now, even before she's passed, is that grief of what will never be.
Right.
And yet one day I just came back from being with my mom for 2 weeks in Milwaukee. And one day she was just having a really bad day and she was being real snarky and mean. And I just kind of sat down on the ground and put myself kind of on the floor in front of her chair. And I put my hand on her knee and I said, Mama, what is going on? And she said to me, I'm losing everything.
Ah,
And I just wanted to cry because it's so true.
yep.
She's not she's not marching into death immediately. She's got this slow walk and
Right.
struggle, and every day it becomes harder and harder to breathe. And then she said to me, I know that I love Jesus and I know where I'm going. And she tells me all the time, I'm ready to go home. I don't know why Jesus, why I'm still here. And she goes, I want to see Jesus. I want to see my mom. I want to see my dad. And I love how you wrote about in your book the difference between the day my life changed and the day that changed everything. And that might not be exactly how you wrote it, but
Yep.
I really kind of grasped onto the day that changes everything.
Yep.
So share with our listeners what you mean when you wrote that.
Yeah. So again, it was just out of that complete desperation of wanting hope. I was trying to find hope. And I kept saying, the day my mom died, July 3rd of 2017, was the day that changed my life. It changed everything for me. And I just held on to that. And it honestly kept me paralyzed, for an immobile for a year or
Mhm.
more. And one day I realized that I was focusing on the wrong thing. And I shouldn't be focusing on the day she died,
Mhm.
because the real beauty will be the day that we're reunited in heaven. And
Mhm.
that'll be the day that changes everything.
Mm,
And so while this first one is harsh,
yeah.
it's temporary. And the
Yeah.
second one is forever and infinite. And
Mhm.
if I have to hold on to one of those, I want to hold on to the one where we're together,
Mhm.
where everything is, so much better than I could even imagine and that I can even
So
comprehend.
good. So
And
good.
also the one she prayed where she'd be. And I had to learn that, like you said, your mom is losing everything. And
Mhm.
what's harder is that she's losing everything slowly. You know,
Yes.
my mother had cancer, and while the end for us, hospice was only a little less than a week. So
Ugh.
her end was very quick. And so another thing that I realized is that, that was her goodbye too.
Mm.
And while you're walking with your mom through these things, this is her goodbye too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it really just, takes time. And I want to be very clear, when we talk about legacies and when we talk about this perspective of hope, I hope people understand I'm 7 years into losing my mom.
Yeah.
I did not have the same hope, the same, capacity to build something with my mom's legacy at the beginning.
Mm.
And so it's okay to sit in that harshness for a while and that lack of comprehension. Just don't stay there.
Yeah.
Just promise yourself you'll eventually get out of it, because it does take a while. Even if you're the most faithful person, it takes a while to find that hope and that faith again. And
Mm.
so, yeah, I just in focusing on the right phrasing and the right
Mhm.
things helped shift me from loss
Mhm.
to love that is forever.
Yeah. I know for me, 10 years ago, when my husband began to struggle and our whole lives, like overnight, they fell apart. It was like one day we're this, and then the next day it was like, what happened to my life? And it took me 3 years to even vocalize or
Mm,
say out loud. I could say it inside and then I would kind of push it away, but it took me 3 years to say out loud, my husband struggles with mental health.
mm,
And then to define what that looks like.
right.
And I think as I'm walking through this navigating this grief with my mom, I think the last 10 years of watching my husband as he went from being this overnight, from being this really healthy guy, physically, mentally, spiritually, to just a shell of the person that he had been before. And as we got him on medication and we got him treatment, there's parts of him that have come back,
Mm.
but there's parts of him that are lost forever. And now he's developed health issues. And so he's had 5 surgeries in the last 18 months. And, it's like there's this grief of walking through this and watching the changes. And with my mom, it's interesting some of the things that people say
Oh,
to me. And you talk about this in your book. So my next question is, what are some of the things that people have said that and did that were most memorable for you in the early days of your grief? And some of them may be great and some of them may be not so great because
right.
I've had both. So share with us, what are some of the most memorable things that people have said and done?
Yeah. The most memorable thing was probably said to me at my mother's funeral. And it was by a family member that had a complicated relationship with her mother. And she came up to me and she said, I'm going to paraphrase. I don't remember exactly, but the
Hmm.
gist was she said, I know that you are so sad that your mom is gone, but you had her for, 30 years. And she was more of a mom in those 30 years than most people get in their lifetime that have their mom for much longer. And at the time, I wasn't ready for it because I was like, well, yeah, that's great. But because she was great, I want her here.
Yeah.
She was too young. I don't want this. But over time, it became the most beautiful compliment next to
Hmm.
you're just like your mom or you're making your mom proud because she was right. The
Yeah.
reason I was grieving so deeply is because she was wonderful and I miss her so much.
Hmm.
And it did give me the perspective of, oh yeah, I was a lucky one. I was blessed because you don't get to choose your family. You don't get to choose your mother. It's
No, you don't.
right. And so I got a good one.
Yeah.
And I realized then, through time that was such a beautiful thing that she said. And then there were obviously things that were said. And I truly think if they're coming from the heart, I try to give people grace. But especially at the beginning of grief, when people say things like, even something as hopeful as they're in a better place. I understand, but also right now, I want that place to be with me. I wasn't
Right.
ready for this. So you're not ready to hear those things. And so I try not to say what not to say just because sometimes just showing up and at least saying
Hmm.
something is
Yeah.
is the most important and powerful. But at the end of the day, I think the best message to grievers that they can hear is I'm willing to sit with you
Hmm.
in this grief and this hurt and heartbreak just as much as I'm ready to sit with you at coffee, listening about, all the fun
Yeah.
things that are happening in your life. And
Yeah.
I'm making space for both, you
Yeah.
know, and you're different now. And I know that you're different. And I welcome both versions of you,
Yeah.
both the one that had somebody and the one that has now lost somebody. And I think that's the most important message that hurting hearts need to hear.
That is the most beautiful thing that you've said this whole interview.
Oh, thank you.
I just think that's so important and true. And one of the things that has been the most, I'm actually tearing up while you're saying that, because one of the things, there's a grief that happens, as you're anticipating. And so I've been kind of, I didn't realize it, but I've been kind of in this grieving process for 10 years.
Right.
And I just started working with a new therapist. And one of the things that I've discovered is that I have some incredible women who have done exactly that.
Mm,
They've come and they've sat with me, or they've provided a safe place for me to vent or to cry or to just not even, to just sometimes ignore my life,
yeah.
to just like, I love to go to Tennessee. I have some friends in Tennessee, and I love to go to Tennessee because I can step out of everything and I
Yep.
can just step into their life, and my life is so much different. And for a while it's relaxing, and I just kind of it's not that I'm not thinking about it, but there's a process that happens when you're given the freedom to just
Yes. Take a
talk.
breath. You need
Yeah,
that.
talk, not talk, whatever. So, what are some of the unexpected realities of grieving that you've experienced? And I'm really asking this question because I know I know where I'm headed.
Yeah.
And I'm like curious. So, what are some of the unexpected things that you've discovered?
For me, I think because I was younger and my mom was younger, it surprised me the fear that I was going to lose other people soon, the
Mm,
fear that something was going to happen to me and my children would have, be without a mother, the fear of pretty much anyone that I loved, that they would be gone too. That
yeah.
really surprised me because I had watched my mom lose both of her parents. I had watched my
Mm,
father lose both of his parents. They were all in older age. And so I thought I knew what grief was,
yeah.
and I didn't. And I
Right.
think that each introduction to grief is different depending on the relationship, but the one thing that also surprised me the most was the health anxiety that would come from it.
Yes.
With my mom, she ended up passing away of breast cancer, and so, that leads to my sister and I needing more tests, needing more,
Mhm.
visits, and the anxiety that comes from those visits
Yeah.
is I can't even describe it in words because it really sends me into a whole other dimension of stress.
Yeah.
And so those were things that really surprised me. And then the other thing in a different capacity was how I felt like my faith had been lost the second my mom passed away. And then that brought shame and
Mhm.
guilt, and then I thought, "Oh my goodness, my mom built her whole life on this faith. Now I'm being a disgrace to her, what is happening?" And
Yeah.
so the 2 biggest things I would definitely say would be those, just the fear and the anxiety that came, and then also the struggle that I had. You know, I now realize I didn't lose my faith, it was just
Mhm.
being challenged,
Mhm.
and it took me a while though to find it again and to pull it back out. But nobody had told me those things. So I didn't tell anybody about them because I thought,
Yeah.
I'm so embarrassed by this.
Right.
Why is this happening to me? And kind of like jealousy. I don't feel a jealous person, but the first time I saw somebody on Mother's Day with their own mother, I was like, I think this is jealousy. And it wasn't that I wanted them not to have it anymore. I just wanted what I used to
Right.
have too.
Right.
And so those were things that I try to write about now also just because I was so shocked by them. And
Mhm.
I think that no matter where you are, you're going to have surprises with grief,
Oh,
and I
completely.
think sometimes people set us up because they say, "Oh, the first year of grief is the hardest." That was not true for me. The first year of grief, I stayed so busy and ran from grief that it couldn't catch
Oh,
me. But just like everything, it eventually catches you.
yeah.
And so, the first year I think is just the first.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that, you'll have first down the road. When I
Mhm.
graduated with my master's, when I had my last child, all these things were new first.
Mhm.
So you have them beyond that first year. So
Yeah.
I think that, you can plan and prepare, but there's going to be surprises with grief.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So many surprises, and I think it's good to try to plan and prepare. I don't. I think it's a healthy. I mean, I even now I know, I'm working with my therapist and we're talking about, okay, this is what you're going through and this is why you're feeling the way you're feeling and as much as you prepare, you have to live that moment.
Right.
And I think that's why people who have not experienced grief or who have not experienced being a caretaker. I mean,
Right.
there's 55 million caretakers in the United States alone, and we all think we're alone.
Right.
We go through these moments of isolation and we think we're alone. We think we're the only one. And I cannot tell you how many times I've gotten a text message or an email from somebody going, "You're so right. I thought I was the only one." And
Yep.
I'm like, "You're not."
Yes.
And I think when we talk about grief and it it's important to talk about it, but until you've experienced it, and like you said, everybody's going to experience it differently based on the relationship they had with the person they're grieving.
Right.
So true. So as we close out our conversation, I think we could sit here and I think we could talk forever.
Oh, yes. I would
I
chat
know.
with you all day.
I know. I would love that. With a cup of coffee.
Yes.
Yes. What is one thing you would like to leave the listeners with today?
That's such a hard question. But I think, if I could leave you with one thing or piece of advice is just to say, take the pressure off of yourself that your grief has to look a certain way or be healed by a certain time or acted upon in ways that you've learned. This is yours, and so
Mhm.
there is no map, there is no guidebook. It is yours, and you're the only one who's going to know how to help yourself step forward into the next day, and to be patient with yourself because every day is going to look different.
Yeah.
And I can promise you that if you don't see the hope now, if you don't see the light, if you don't have the faith that you used to, I can promise you that all of those things are still there.
Yeah.
They're tucked away. They're waiting until you're ready for them again. You may just not be ready, and that's okay. And the only thing I would urge people to do is just promise themselves that wherever they are in this moment, that you don't stay there. Just stay there for a little bit. That's okay. But this is a journey. Life is a journey, and you've got to find a way to do different things to get you out of that space that you're in every single day, every single moment. And so just remind yourself, you can do this. Grief is survivable, even if it doesn't feel like it. And please reach out to, you, me, anybody that
Mhm.
is in this space because, we're here and
Yeah.
we know a similar path. And I'm happy to listen to anybody's story.
I love that. Yeah, it's true. Listeners, if you are in a space, we're gonna ask Chelsea right now how we can connect with her. And I found her, I found her on social media and just tracking her on social media. And then I ended up getting a copy of her book from someone else. And the minute I picked the book up, I just went, I have to find this woman. I have to find her, and I worked pretty hard to
Did you? Oh
to get
no.
oh, yeah, I jumped through lots of hoops to get through, and, I think it's so important. So if you're sitting out there and you're saying, "Oh, they're not gonna really respond." Yeah, yeah, we will. Whether
Yes.
you reach out to Chelsea, whether you reach out to me, we will respond, and
Yes.
I pray every day for the listeners,
Yes.
especially as I'm navigating my crazy, chaotic caretaking journey. So, Chelsea, as we close, tell the listeners how they can connect with you.
Yeah. On Facebook and Instagram, you can find me at Hope and Harsh Realities. And you can get my website by either going to www.hopeandharshrealities.com or you can go to youareherlegacy.com. And they will both lead you to me. And just as Carole has said, I respond to every message. If
Yeah.
there is a comment on my Facebook, Instagram, I try to hit every single one. And usually, if you message me through Facebook, it will tell you to email me because email is the best way.
Yeah.
Because, as your platform grows, those messages can become overwhelming or go to your spam. But yeah, Facebook and Instagram, I'm on every day trying to just connect with people. So I hope you'll
Oh,
find me there.
I love that. Well, I will put all of that information in the show notes so you can just, listener, go down and click the link and go to her website, go to her social media. I'll even put her email down there so you can click and it'll open up an email. I'll make it very easy for you to get a hold of both of us, one or the other. So please do reach out.
Yeah.
And
And I think we didn't say the name. I don't know if we've said the name of the
I
book,
don't know if
but
I did.
yeah, if we haven't, it is Now That She's Gone, A Daughter's Reflections on Loss, Love, and a Mother's Legacy, and it's available wherever books are sold.
We talked all about the book, but I might,
I know, I was like, I don't know if we
I
said the title
did
or
we
not.
say the title? I don't know. I was just so excited to dive into the conversation.
You may have. I don't know. I was
You
like, I
know,
don't know if you have.
who knows? I'll listen back. And I'll go, oh yeah, we did.
We
Or
did.
no, we didn't. I just love it. Chelsea, thank you so much for joining me today. I am so thankful for your book, and I know that it's going to stay close to me as I navigate the coming days and months. And as I close out our show today, I am so thankful for each of you who join me each week. I know that the caretaker's journey can be messy and chaotic. And some of you, like me, are navigating the anticipated loss of a loved one, and some of you are grieving a recent loss. Please know, as I said a few minutes ago, I pray for you, the listener, every day. I go through the algorithms, I look at the countries, I look at the cities, I look at the number of downloads, and I just pray for every single one of them because I don't take this for granted. I am here to extend to you the invitation to connect because we as caretakers need connection. So if you know a caretaker, please share the show with them. If you haven't subscribed yet, I've talked about this before, will you do so? Because that's how other caretakers can find us and find our community. And next week, I'll be back for another meaningful conversation about what the caretaker's journey looks like. And until then, it's all about him.